Okay, so good morning. Thank you for this invitation to come to Kansas. The last time I did a winter trip to the Midwest, I ended up spending the night in Chicago and not making it the next day to Springfield, Illinois. And just turned around going home again. So I was hoping that I wouldn't go home from Minneapolis last night. And we made it here just fine. But I'm really excited to be here. I hope that what I'm going to share today is something that will resonate with you. My number one goal when I talk about the 4-H thriving model is that you leave here going, that's what we do. And maybe you leave here saying, that's what we do, and I'm really proud of the work that I do as a 4-H youth development educator here in Kansas. I'm going to introduce myself a little more fully, but I want to start today with a story, because I think stories are good. And this is a young woman, her name's Rachel. And she is shown here in this picture last summer. She's stocking fish as an intern for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife at our 4-H center outside of Salem, Oregon. And Rachel is in her, she's a junior, I think she's just starting her senior year of college at OSU in oceanography and fish and wildlife. So let's keep Rachel in mind. And let's go and look here. And I know Anissa may recognize this scene, who's having spent time in the Northwest. But this is the Skagit Valley of Washington State, and this is where I grew up, in the tulip fields. And it really does look that beautiful, although that's not maybe the best picture of the tulips. The Skagit Valley of Washington grows more tulips than they do in Holland, and they export a lot to Holland as well. So when you think about Holland and the tulips there, I can tell you that springtime in the Skagit Valley and the splendor of the color is pretty amazing. And I had the opportunity to grow up in this kind of idyllic place in the middle of a big farming community in the Skagit River Delta with Washington State Extension all around us. I'm very familiar with the work that was going on there. But I had a singular interest as a little kid, and that was to get a horse. You can ask my parents, well, you can't anymore, but at one time they would have told you that, yes, that was from the time I came out of the womb, that all I had on my mind was a horse. And so I bought a horse. I got my brother to go down to the bank with me and forge the signature for my parents to get $35 out of my savings account to buy a pony. And when the pony arrived at our house, my parents decided that maybe I was serious about this, and they agreed that they would facilitate it on one requirement, and that was that I join 4-H. Because they didn't know anything about ponies, and they thought this would be a good way for me to learn how to care for the pony. Well, I joined 4-H as 10 years old and never looked back. So my 4-H experience was very much centered around, I had one singular interest, having that horse, having that pony, and everything else that 4-H gave me came second. It just mattered that I was there, and I was there with friends, and I was doing something that I was very interested in. So this is me as probably a senior in high school, not on the pony anymore, but on my horse Val at the state 4-H show. Well, history has a way of doing some cool things if you live long enough. This is last year, and this is my horse that I ride every day when I'm home now. His name is Highland Scholar, and the woman there wiping my boots is a woman named Michelle Blockley. And when I was in 4-H, she was a person who gave me a developmental relationship. She believed in me, she fanned my spark, she wanted me to succeed, she helped me, she loaned me equipment, she did things to help me become the writer that I wanted to become all those years ago. She also scared me. And when my daughter was 13 and she was having trouble navigating middle school, and I asked her, is there anybody that you could ask? Could you talk to your teachers? Is there someone at your school that you feel maybe could help you and you could talk about these things to? And she just looked at me and she said, were you ever not afraid of anybody? I said, oh yeah, Michelle. I went right back. So Michelle Blockley was this wonderful, nurturing woman in my life, and also held me accountable. And when we're held accountable, when we're young people, that sternness can sometimes be intimidating. So we have both these qualities of expectation, accountability, love, support, nurturing, and belief in facilitating sparks. Well, this story gets better because this man, his name is Mark Schrader, and he was the first person, the first American to solo circumnavigate the world on his little sailboat Resourceful when he was 30 years old. Now think about that. A little 40-foot sailboat around the world all by yourself, you're 30 years old. And Mark and Michelle are married. And so when I was riding my horse across the street at the stable, across the street from the stable was a place called Victoria Village. And Victoria Village was a place where troubled adolescents and adolescents who needed more support for certain developmental disabilities could come and live in group environments, therapeutic group environments. And Mark ran that program. And he, at some point, said, you know, we got to do better by kids. We have to be able to do this better. And he decided to go around the world, largely to get out on the Blue Highway, but also because he really believed in youth and he wanted to raise money and figure out how to do youth development better. Little did I know how these two lives would go on to impact 4-H even more. So there is Resourceful, a little 40-foot boat. And let's fast forward it from this time around the world to about 2013. And this is a ship called Ocean Watch. And Ocean Watch went around the Americas. It was a sponsored trip from a bunch of national sponsors. Went around the Americas, left Seattle, up around the Northwest Passage, which is, you can do it now. There was a time when you couldn't sail around that far north, all the way down the east coast of the United States, South America, around Cape Horn and back up. And on the boat were scientists, and across the United States and the world really, children in schools were following this journey of Ocean Watch and learning about ocean health and learning about the problems with our oceans. And you know, Captain Mark, in 1983, when he sailed around the world, he saw the garbage dump off of Patagonia, and then he saw it again when he went around the next time, some years later. And what saw him horrified him. And he thought, if we don't start addressing our ocean health, the very part of our earth that sustains so much of us, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And he also began to recognize, he's always recognized, I think, that young people are how we're going to do it. So as they went around the Americas and did all this, he had classrooms. This is a classroom in Malibu, California, that had, they did songs and art, and then he came off Ocean Watch when they were nearby and came and met with the students there at the school. So this was a whole year-long journey that took place. And after the journey was done, funding was gone, and Ocean Watch sort of sat languishing in California and Oakland. And a funny thing happened, serendipity I call it. I was in California talking with the Thrive Foundation for Youth and Wendy Wheeler, who some of you might know from her days at National 4-H Council. And Wendy and I were talking about how do we bring youth development theory and action more prominently to 4-H, and how do we help us understand how 4-H really helps youth thrive? So we were having that conversation. I went to the San Jose airport, and I got a call in the San Jose airport from Mark Schrader, who I hadn't talked to for years. He said, you know, this boat's sitting down there. I'm like, well, I'm down here. And he said, is there anything we can do with 4-H and Ocean Watch? We have to do something with young people. So I said, well, let me think about it. And I got home the next day, and National 4-H Council called and said, hey, we've got some Samsung money. You guys, can you put on a camp this summer? And I said, well, can it be an ocean camp? And they said, oh, sure, whatever kind of camp you want. So I'm like, all right. So fast forward through a whole bunch of details where have you ever been just abuzz with like things falling in place, including a sailmaker who would make us a 60-foot spinnaker with the 4-H clover on it in 3 weeks. Yeah, and fundraisers who can, these things are not cheap. And when Mark called the sailmaker in San Diego to see if we could get it done, he said, "Are you kidding me, 3 weeks?" And Mark said, "It's for 4-H. He goes, "Well, what's 4-H? He goes, "They're going to save the world, these kids." "Okay, I'll get it done." And so the ship was in Oakland, and they got the spinnaker up, and off they went. And it just so happens that I got a photographer. I asked someone, I didn't know a photographer in the Bay Area. "Oh yeah, my friend does these things." So I emailed him. I'd never met him. And he said, "Well, they're going to have to sail out and under the Golden Gate and turn around and come back so I can get the picture." And I never even met the guy, and he got these beautiful pictures. So the Ocean Watch set sail from San Francisco Bay up the coast of Oregon. To where we had 160 kids waiting for their experience with the 2 sea captains on Ocean Watch. It turned out that Ocean Watch was so big that there was only one berth in Newport, Oregon. It was at a place called the Embarcadero. And the Embarcadero said, "This is for 4-H. You can park it here for a month. Oh, and not only that, your kids can use the whole dock on the 4th of July. It's like a boardwalk to do public education." So they did things around ocean salinity and underwater noise and ocean health and tying knots and all sorts of things that the teens were educating the public on the 4th of July. And then they rotated around on the ship and went out and learned all sorts of things on the scientific ship Ocean Watch. Well, here's Rachel, who we started the story with. And the day that the teens showed up, we were waiting with down on the dock, and Rachel, out of the whole group of 160, have you ever met someone who just radiates, "This is my match. I belong here"? And she came down the dock on fire, let's talk about a spark, and stopped and threw her arms out and said, "I never dreamed that my 2 loves, saving the ocean and 4-H, would be together in the same place." She was so excited, and that week for her set the stage for her to go on to do some really amazing things, including, finally, last year, stocking the 4-H pond with fish on her way to helping save the oceans. So I started with that story, as twisted and turning as it is, because I want you to start by thinking, what is it that sparks us? What facilitates those sparks? What fans those sparks? What sustains those sparks? That, 50 years later, I still ride my horse every day. 50 years later, I'm still in contact with the person who, when I was a teenager, helped fan those sparks. The way that Rachel's story was facilitated in her sparks and helped by 4-H. I know that Captain Mark in the boat has a picture of Rachel because he stood out. She stood out to him as someone who was going to really make a difference in the world. So we'll shift gears now and talk about the 4-H thriving model. And some of you have probably heard about it. I know you've been talking a little bit, perhaps a little bit of introductions here and there. But in my work in Oregon as a 4-H specialist, I'm a developmental scientist by training. And my job is to translate youth development theory into practice and then measure the results of the practice. Kind of both program planning, program evaluation part. And at about the same time all this was happening in 2013, I was invited by the governor of Oregon to sit on the Youth Development Council, which was a newly formed board that oversaw funding of public money distribution across the state of Oregon. In my very first meeting at the Capitol, I was sitting on the dais, and there was a report being given by a private research firm that had been hired to look at the evidence of all the youth-serving organizations in Oregon, how they knew they were successful. So they were going down agency after agency after agency. And they got to Oregon 4-H and they said, we couldn't find anything. There's nothing out there. They haven't published anything on their results. We don't really know much, but we know 4-H does great work and it's everywhere. So moving on. And I don't know about you, but I didn't think that was very good. And in fact, I kind of got a chill down my spine. We're the largest serving youth organization in the country. We've been around for 100 years, over 100 years. We've done amazing things in the lives of people like me, in the lives of people like Rachel, in the lives of millions of young people whose sparks have been ignited, facilitated, sustained, and propelled forward into healthy development. And so, with my conversation with Wendy Wheeler, I said, I need to do something. I have to kind of set the stage. And so the Thrive Foundation for Youth gave me some money and bought out some time so I could do a really deep dive into the literature related to youth development. And I spent the whole summer reading everything I could that has been published for the last, youth development as a positive youth development really started about 1990, when there was a recognition that this idea of intervention for problems was not enough. That actually have a lot of kids who don't necessarily have problems that need intervention, but they need support for them to grow into the best possible person that they can become. So as a result of reading all that, I began to just kind of formulate and think we can tell the story better. And I asked myself, what is it that 4-H is unique? What stands out? And I think one of our biggest strengths and our biggest uniqueness is that we start with a young person's interest. If you want to learn about a horse, we can teach you that. You want to learn about ocean health, we'll figure out a way to do it. You want to learn art, dancing, computers, how to raise a steer, whatever it is, we start with the young person's passion and interest and build around that. And that's very different than programs that come and are just delivered around a topic. It's okay, we're going to learn about this today, whether or not you're particularly interested in it. So it's our place of our strength. So I want to talk about then 4-H as a developmental context. Now, one of the goals I had for the 4-H thriving model was that we would align how we talk in 4-H with the rest of the youth development world. I don't know about you, but we kind of have our own words and our own kind of way of doing things. And it means that we're kind of a step away from everybody else who's doing youth development. So I really purposefully put in the language that youth development youth development agencies across the country would be using. So developmental context. But what I'd like you to think about that, if that's a word that's like, I want you to think about that means, how do we do a good program? Because if we do our programs well, we are providing a developmental context, a context in which youth will develop in a positive way. And you'll notice at the center there is youth sparks. So we begin with youth sparks. And then, and I'll go into this a little bit more, and then we surround that young person with programs that adhere to youth program quality principles that have been well established in the literature, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we wrap all of that with developmental relationships. So that really important critical element that holds it all together are the relationships that we develop with young people and volunteers develop with young people to facilitate their spark within really, really good youth development programs. So let's talk a little bit about sparks. A spark is a passion for a self-identified interest or skill, or a capacity that metaphorically lights a fire in a young person's life, providing energy, joy, purpose, and direction. And those words are from the late Dr. Peter Benson at Search Institute. And if you have not already seen this TED Talk, I encourage you to do it. You can Google it easily enough. Just Sparks Peter Benson. And he does a lovely 25-minute TED Talk on Sparks. What we know from Sparks is that comes from within. And when I sit with, or if I'm in a group of young people in an auditorium and I ask, how many of you have a spark? Over half will raise their hand and be able to identify it. If I talk more about what a spark is, then even more can raise their hands. Sparks are different than just a leisure activity. They create actions that not only benefit the young person, but benefit society as a whole. So we're always thinking about, again, in our 4-H work, how do we help kids contribute to their community? Well, we help them contribute through their sparks. We may not see that right away. When I was 9 or 10 years old on my pony, I was not thinking about how I was contributing to society. But over the course of time, in my 4-H program, then that became more and more a part of what I was doing. Sparks provide intrinsic fuel. It comes from inside for a young person's growth and their knowledge and skills. So I want to learn about this. I want to know about this. I want to be connected to people who can help me with this. That all comes from inside. I was the world's best teenager because my parents had huge leverage. I knew without a doubt that pony would be gone if I didn't toe the line exactly right. They were lucky that I had such a good, strong spark in me. But sparks enhance the young person's network. So networking becomes so important. You know, those of us who are a little older, most of us got our jobs by applying with our resume. That isn't how we get career moves now. We get it through networking, association, and building that social capital so people know who we are. And Sparks can help us connect with those opportunities. So this little girl singing is at a national photo shoot, singing with Jennifer Nettles. Some of you know Jennifer Nettles from Sugarland, also a 4-H'er who got her start with her spark in Clover and Kids in Georgia, Bo Ryle's wonderful music 4-H program. And so now here's a little girl, years and years later, singing with Jennifer Nettles. How exciting that is to have her hero be a 4-H alum. And be able to facilitate her spark. So around that spark, we have to bring youth program quality standards or principles. And there's a number of models that have looked at just kind of differing lists of what goes into a good program. But I like this one as one of the best. This comes from Eccles and Gutman's National Research Council work in the early 2000s. Where they did a meta-analysis of all sorts of youth development programs and said, all right, if we're going to do it well, what needs to happen? So the first part is physical and psychological safety. Number one, if we don't provide a safe space for a young person, their spark is not going to be facilitated. In fact, they could be damaged. So we have to take the raw material that a young person brings and then begin to build around it. Physical and psychological safety, appropriate structure. So as you know, in the programs that we do, we don't just have our free-for-all, but we have a plan for what we're going to do and the structures for our plan. Supportive relationships. We'll talk more in depth when we talk about developmental relationships. Opportunities to belong. And this one's highlighted because in our research on the 4-H thriving model, this one comes out the strongest over and over and over, that I have to belong. I have to feel like I belong for me to benefit from this program. Positive social norms. And again, I think this is where 4-H really excels. Not only do we have careful codes of conduct that we're explicit with kids and volunteers and professionals what acceptable behavior is and social norms, but our teens teach younger children what it means to be a 4-H member. Another YouTube opportunity for you is to look at the 4-H Code of Conduct video that a group of kids in Georgia did for the National 4-H Congress. Just amazingly creative, but very clear, saying if you're going to be a 4-H'er and you're going to go to National 4-H Congress, then here's how you're going to have to do it, because this is what we do as 4-H'ers. This is how we represent 4-H at the national level. Super creative, super fun, super funny. If I'm having a bit of a bad day or stress, I just put on that video, watch these kids sing this song, and I feel good about it, and off we go again. So National 4-H Congress Code of Conduct video, if you can find it. It's really worth seeing. So we do that well. Support for efficacy and mattering. Not only do you belong, but you matter. And guess what? You have abilities that you can be part of our group, that as you're learning. So if you think about the number of stories I know we've all heard about young kids who come to 4-H and they say, I was so afraid to speak publicly. And by the time they're finished with their mid-high school years, they're emceeing awards nights and speaking very confidently. That's efficacy. That's a sense of, I can do this. And it doesn't happen overnight. We scaffold it. Maybe this young person just says 2 words. Maybe co-leads. Maybe just reads 1 paragraph, but then eventually steps into a more fuller role. So how do we support that development of efficacy and that you matter? You're an important part of our community. Opportunities for skill building, of course we do this all the time. Mastery is a big part of what we do in 4-H. And then integration of family, schools, and communities. And this is going to become increasingly important in the global youth work that all of us are part of. In the past, 4-H again has kind of been separate. We have our clubs and they're often really connected to schools, certainly communities, but families in some cases for sure. But this real integration where there's a seamless movement between youth development, schools, families, and communities. Something a movement that we're seeing more and more attention being given to. So how many here are familiar with the essential elements of 4-H? Yeah, good. Many of you are. It's really important to point out right here that those essential elements are embedded right here. Do you see echoes of those? So I have opportunities to belong. I have opportunities for mastery. I have opportunities for independence. And I have opportunities for generosity. And I point that out because it's when we've talked about the 4-H thriving model and kind of advancing it across the 4-H system, there's concern that, but wait, what about the essential elements? I just got used to doing those. You already are doing them and you will continue to do them. And they are here. Just some more detail around behind what those essential elements are. Okay, so then the last part out there is developmental relationships. This again is kind of an exciting, newer area of understanding in that the relationship that an adult has with a young person has some qualities to it that make it developmental versus just, that's my 4-H leader. Not that there's anything wrong with having a 4-H leader because that person is showing up, but when the relationship becomes developmental, then we see the power of the relationship between an adult and a young person. So first of all, developmental relationships express care. I care for you. I see you. I'm glad you came. I know your name. I missed you last time. How are you doing? What's your spark? How can I help facilitate your spark? Those are comments and expressions of care to a young person. Secondly, they challenge growth. So how do we, when we work with young people, challenge that little bit of stretch? So, as Vygotsky would say, that zone of proximal development, just a little beyond where you think you can do it. How can I challenge you to go from reading a paragraph to maybe giving a speech? How can we make that happen? So I challenge that growth. Provide support. So again, providing the things that are necessary for growth to happen. So that's emotional support. Many times it's not monetary, material support, transportation support. I mean, all sorts of ways of how can I help you be engaged in this 4-H work we talk about. Sharing power. We have talked about youth-adult partnerships for a long time in 4-H. We understand the power of youth. We definitely have had that as part of our 4-H culture. But when we really talk about sharing power, particularly developmentally, so if I think about working with an 8 or 9-year-old, or 10-year-old, I'm going to have a very different sharing of power than I would with a 17 or 18-year-old. Developmentally, 8 and 9-year-olds, they just need to know the rules. They want to know the rules to fit in, to belong. They don't expect to make decisions so much. When you're working with older teens, they need autonomy, they need independence, they need the opportunity to co-direct. And so as we work from young children into adolescence, we begin to see an increasing sharing of power, increasing autonomy and decision-making upon the young people. If we're to be successful, we're not going to work with 18-year-olds like we do 8-year-olds. Or they're going to feel like you're treating them like an 8-year-old and they're not going to be around for long. So we have to think about how do we share power developmentally. And then finally, expanding possibilities, showing the opportunities. This is a hallmark of why we bring kids to campus, right? We do our campus program here where kids come and connect them. So look here's what you could do. You could come here. This is what college looks like. This is what living in a college dorm feels like. These are people who are interested in the same thing that you're interested in. Helping expand those possibilities, build those pathways and networks. So that's all those things in developmental relationships. Now let me ask you this question. How many of you with your volunteers think about the role of the volunteer in these ways? Like, talk to that new volunteer about helping share, expand pathways. Maybe, I hope we do a better job of that. But by and large, my experience is volunteers who want to work with youth encompass these kind of instinctively. They know what a young person needs. We as youth development professionals often know what a young person needs, but imagine how powerful it could be if we actually train people on how to develop, enhance, maintain developmental relationships with young people. In many cases we're already doing it, but now we'll be able to measure it, which is pretty cool. Okay, so that is our developmental context, and so I want you to think of that again as a really good program. The other thing that I'd like you to think about that target area of the 4-H Thriving model is that's the part that you have the most control over. So if we think about putting a process into motion that we're going to end up with healthfully developed young people, this is the part where educators have the most control and play the most important role. And that's why as you're thinking this through, thinking, how do I incorporate those principles? And then how do I train my volunteers to incorporate those principles? And if we have time, we'll come back and talk about this part more in depth. I think it's super important. Okay, so the next part of the 4-H Thriving model is called the Thriving Trajectory. And a thriving trajectory, I want you to think about a young person who's just expanding and growing over time. So that cone represents the growth over time. The order of these that are not linear. They don't start with one and go to the other, nor are any of these more important than the others. It's just kind of a graphic limitation there. But what we know about young people who are thriving is they have certain qualities. So first of all, they're open to challenge and discovery. Second, they have a growth mindset. Third, they have a hopeful purpose. Fourth, they have a transcendent awareness. I'll unpack that one for you a little bit. Next, they have a pro-social orientation. And then finally, a positive emotionality, and then goal management self-regulation. So let's talk through each of those one by one and kind of the research base behind them. So being open to challenge and discovery, thriving youth have the desire and ability to explore and try new things. They also possess a growth mindset that supports effort and learning over innate ability. A lot of this work comes from Carol Dweck at Stanford University. How many of you are familiar with Carol's work on growth mindset? Oh, good, you have a whole new bunch of YouTube videos to watch. She's wonderful. And the basic premise behind growth mindset is that we are not fixed in our ability. We have the ability to grow, to change, to get better through effort. And so when we work with young people who say, oh, well, I'm just not that good at it, or I'm not good at math, I'm not good at whatever it is, I'm fixed. That's the opposite of a growth mindset that says, I'm not good at math yet. So let's put this in a 4-H context. How many of you have had a young person at a fair who's maybe showing an animal and doesn't do all that well? What do you say to them? Who wants to talk? What do you say to a young person? Okay, go ahead.
I would just tell them, especially if it's their first year, keep trying. This is a great first experience. Let's keep working.
Yeah. You say keep trying. It's your first year. Keep going. It's a great first experience. Not one of us would say, well, you're probably just not that good at it. We wouldn't say it. Why would we allow the kids to say it to themselves? So this idea of growth mindset and that effort matters and that we can change. Now this is really aligning with the work underway with adolescent and youth, child brain development around neuroplasticity. So I know you heard a little bit about ACEs yesterday and how the brain begins to form its neural pathways. And that opportunity as a child and adolescent, those pathways are wide open. That's the best time to learn that our brains are really able to do it. Try learning a musical instrument when you're 8 compared to when you're 58. It's a lot easier when you're 8 because your brain is still forming those pathways. So we know from science that youth can develop pretty much any skill, but it takes practice and effort, and that opportunity to have that growth mindset becomes super important. Okay, then the next one is on having a hopeful purpose. So purpose is the stable and generalized intention to accomplish something that is at the same time meaningful to the self and consequential to the world beyond the self. So here we're starting to see echoes of not only do I have a personal spark and purpose, but it's important that it connects to something bigger than myself as well. Echoes of generosity as we begin to build some identity. Bill Damon at Stanford Center for Adolescence has done a lot of work on this. Also in the 4-H movement, Anthony Burrow at Cornell is working with the Cornell New York 4-H program, doing some interesting work around purpose and the development of purpose and hope. We have a lot of young people without hope. We have incredibly way too high suicide rate, an incredibly way too high bullying rate. We have an incredibly way too high, carefully curated social media that makes young people feel inferior because everybody else is doing it right and I don't. Lots of factors working against us developing this sense of purpose and hope in young people. Purpose and hope is deeply connected to identity development. Who am I? What is my purpose here in life? What is my spark? How will I bring that spark forth into the world? That's part of what we do to help you thrive. So then the third one, pro-social orientation. So I love this. This is Ezra Taft Benson. He was the former U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, which I find really wonderful, given our agricultural roots. One who is kind and sympathetic and gentle with others. He is considerate of others' feelings, courteous in his behavior, and has a helpful nature. Kindness pardons others' weaknesses and faults. Kindness is extended to all. to the aged and the young, to animals, and to those of low station as well as high. So thriving youth see helping others as personal responsibility and live up to the values of respect, responsibility, honesty, kindness, and generosity. Thriving youth care about and give back to their communities. So again, we see echoes of giving back. And I don't know about you, but I think we could use some more kindness in this world than we have seen, especially in recent years. It feels like we're getting pretty unkind, uncivil in our discourse, in our public way of dealing with each other, in our divided sense of who we are in this country rather than who we are together in this country. And I don't know that the adults are going to be able to fix it, because the adults are pretty entrenched, but the youth can. And every time I work with young people, I'm struck over and over and over again by their kindness for each other and their sense of community. A number of years ago, I had a graduate student who did a qualitative study. She was interested in the 5 C's of youth development, what that meant for kids from different backgrounds. And she did some cognitive interviewing with kids who lived in the homeless shelter in Corvallis, Oregon, where Oregon State is. And it was interesting because her question was really like, what is success to you? When she talked to the high-performing 4-H kids, success was way down the road after I go to college and get my advanced degree and get a good job and get married and have a family. Then maybe I'll feel successful. And that has its own set of issues, by the way, for a lot of young people who head that way without really questioning where they're going. But when she talked to the young people who were living in the shelter, they said success is right now. And success is how we treat each other and knowing that we have each other's back. That's how I get up in the morning every day. That's how I go to school. That's how I know my life is successful, that I have quality relationships with people that I care about, that I'm kind, that I have integrity, and that I can count on them. 2 very different visions of success from 2 very different groups of young people. All doing well, but in different circumstances. So we have to think about that pro-social behavior. This comes from social learning theory, by the way, Alfred Bandura. We learn socially. We learn how to behave by watching others. So if I'm a little kid and I walk into a room, the first thing the little kid's going to do is observe the situation and figure out very quickly and probably unconsciously, how do I get into this group? And learning very quickly that if I come into a group and steal the truck or hit somebody, I'm not getting into that group very successfully. And of course we coach young people on say please, how we do that, be kind. But it really matters, we learn. And our 4-H members teach each other. They learn socially from those who've gone before, and then they teach the younger kids as well. So how do we promote this pro-social awareness in our 4-H programs? Transcendent awareness. Thriving youth are aware of a reality bigger than themselves, from which their meaning and purpose is defined or derived. The transcendent awareness shapes everyday thought and actions. So this is the basis of our moral and our ethical decision making. A lot of work has been done in the area of spirituality and positive youth development. And in some cases, this can be equated to spirituality, to religiosity, but not necessarily. I think it's really important that you think about this in terms of connection to something bigger. So youth who have like Rachel, who have a heart to clean up the ocean, environmental consciousness in some cases, shows that I'm aware that there's a bigger world than me. There are bigger forces at play than my own ego. And for us to be healthy, we have to get beyond that ego and see how we're connected. And when you think about makes us make moral or ethical decisions, why do we do that? So if I say, Donna took me this morning to Starbucks. I was really happy to get my coffee. I'm from Oregon, we need our good coffee. What if I just didn't pay for it? What if we just drove away and I didn't pay? What caused me to pay for my coffee? Really, think about it. It's the rules, okay, but I could break the rule. Why do we agree to pay for our coffee?
The consequence if you don't.
What's the consequence?
Well, you shoplifting, jail.
Yeah. Yeah, we have rules for that. And in some cases, the rules are what motivates our behavior. But I would challenge that in us we know right from wrong. And that if I were to steal from somebody, I'm hurting somebody. And so my moral and ethical decisions are an awareness that there's something else out there besides me. And I have an obligation not to hurt, not to inflict pain. That's a moral decision. So that transcends the ego. What we see in psychopathic behavior is the inability to transcend the ego for whatever reason. I mean, people are really damaged sometimes, but the inability to see that my consequences have an impact on someone else. So think about this transcendent awareness. We can think about it in terms of spirituality, religion, a commitment to a bigger cause, a sense that there's something bigger than ourselves, but really that it determines our behavior, as Pamela Epstein-King talks about. It leads to a clarity and commitment of beliefs and resulting behaviors that contribute to self and society. So if I believe that it matters that I don't hurt others by stealing from them, then my actions will follow that, regardless of whether I'm going to go to jail or not. I mean, I think that's for those who can't transcend, and then you're going to have a little threat over you. So think about how are we helping young people understand their ethical and moral role in society. Okay, positive emotionality. Many of you might be familiar with this idea of emotional intelligence, but the emotional brain responds to an event more quickly than the thinking brain. If you're not able to manage your distressing emotions, if you can't have empathy and effective relationships, then no matter how smart you are, you're not going to get very far. So having emotional maturity and emotional intelligence, there have been many, many people who have said this is the most important thing a young person can have, because we have to have the ability to do this to function well. So young people or thriving youth are positive and optimistic and are able to manage emotions in ways that lead to their health and well-being. So here's a couple of interesting things about helping with positive emotionality. Imagine it's 100, well, over here in Kansas, it gets humid, right, and hot in the summer. Okay, it's 102, 99% humidity. It's a July afternoon. Everybody's hot. It's the 4th day of your fair. And it's, you see what I'm setting up, right? And there is inevitably a major meltdown somewhere in the 4-H, or sorry, here at the fair. Something goes wrong, meltdown, high emotions, didn't win, didn't lose, whatever it was. Again, you're going to handle it well because you're professionals, but everybody's tired. Imagine if we were to take time before we got to fair and said, hey, here we are, we're going to be at fair, it's going to be hot. Some of you are going to be really satisfied and happy with how you did at fair. Others of you might be disappointed if it doesn't go as well as we planned. And the word's gone. The likelihood that people are going to have really strong emotions during that time is going to come up. So why don't we talk about what some of those emotions might be? I might feel mad or frustrated. And then let's talk about, if this happens to us, how are we going to handle it? What are some strategies, and how can we kind of plan ahead of time so when we get to that really hot day, we as a group work together to have good emotions and manage ourselves well. Because remember, we're at the fair and it's kind of a public thing and we're representing 4-H, and you can do all that part of it as well. Have we ever taken the time to help young people think about how to manage their own emotions? I would challenge you that that no before we talked about it explicitly in the 4-H thriving model, that most people are like, oh no, that would have been a good idea, actually, because young people can be empowered. You're helping a young person thrive when you help them understand likely emotions and how to navigate them. So I just finished a little while ago Mr. Rogers' biography. And he was an amazing man, by the way. This is an amazing biography because he so understood children at children's level. And he used to say, all feelings are mentionable, therefore all feelings are manageable. So if you don't do as well showing at the fair as you wanted to, it's okay to feel disappointed. It's okay to feel like something was unfair. It's okay to feel angry or frustrated. Likewise, if you do well, it's okay to feel happy and successful. All feelings are mentionable, and therefore all feelings are manageable. This becomes critically important when we begin to work with adolescents, because one of the things that can happen is suppression of emotion. It doesn't matter. I don't care. And you know perfectly well that that young person cares a lot because they've been working really hard for this day at the fair and it doesn't go well, and to just stuff it and say it doesn't matter. I guarantee you that will come out destructively somewhere down the line. So our job is to help young people say, it's all right. You know, you can cry even for half an hour, and then we're going to pull it together and we're going to move on because this is how life works. But it's okay to feel sad, frustrated, angry, disappointed, whatever it is, and then we'll move on. So as we help young people with that suppression, be really conscious that we're watching for any signs of suppression. The tool that we have is called reframing, where we help a young person think through alternatives to this. All right, so you're disappointed. What parts did go well? What parts did you have control of? What parts were not in your control? You know, I mean, judges are judges. It's coming through a human lens, so there's always an inherent bias. No matter how hard judges try and be unbiased, you know, it's nature. That's how the world works. So some of those things are out of a young person's control. Other things are not. And that's where you bring it right back to growth mindset and say, all right, well, how about if next time this is how you approach it? So you're beginning to build skills of reframing distressing emotions rather than allowing suppression. We've got a lot of work that we do, don't we, as youth development specialists? There's a lot going on. Okay, so the last one then is self-regulation and in particular goal setting. Self-regulation is a very robust field in the field of youth development, but goal setting in particular because we do so much of it in 4-H. So thriving youth set goals and persevere in achieving their goals. They also make self-regulatory decisions that lead to better short-term and long-term outcomes. And a lot of the work that we see coming from Angela Duckworth in the idea of grit is reflected in this idea of self-regulation and goal setting. So grit is about that perseverance to keep going, not to settle for the short term, but recognizes, she says, that life is more of a marathon than a sprint, and it takes effort over time to achieve our goals. I love it when things come and then they go. I'm sure it'll come back. That's what I get for not having notes. When we talk about short-term and long-term regulation, do you remember the ad campaign that National 4-H Council had a number of years ago? The house that hogs built? Anyone remember that video? Yeah, okay, great. So it was she from Kansas? Maybe it was Ohio. Ohio, maybe. Anyway, young teenage 4-H'er raised hogs in her 4-H project, saved every single bit of money that she made selling her hogs at market, saved it. And there's a story of her, by the time she was 18, she bought her own house with the money that the hogs built. rented it out to her aunt and uncle, and then headed off to college. So this is a young person who said, and her 4-H leader was commenting, saying, you know, she never spent money on herself. She just saved it. And once in a while, maybe she'd spend a little bit. But she had a long-term goal of owning a home before she went to college, and she did it. I mean, that's amazing for a young person, not only to have that lofty of a goal, but to attain it as well. So when we talk about that goal setting, we're talking about exchanging short-term gratification for long-term goal and the grit that it takes to to do that over time. We live in a world of amazing instant gratification. You want something from Amazon? It's here tomorrow. You can maybe get it tonight if you get it fast enough. We have a world that says, you want it, you got it. You want it, you got it. You want it, you got it. Is that how any of us have been successful? It's over the long haul. So when we help youth thrive, we help them see that long-term investment in goal setting and the discipline to get there is a really important part of what we're doing with youth development. So when we talk about thriving youth, what we are building here in this model is that when we do programs well, we set up that developmental context well. We are trained and ready and we know what we're doing. And we focus our activities on things that will help you thrive. Now again, I know we're already doing those activities, but maybe not with the intentionality that we could. And maybe we're not training our volunteers to think about how they can build thriving intentionally. That's kind of the work ahead of us. Young people who are on a thriving trajectory head towards some important developmental outcomes. Now, it's important to think about that as a trajectory, not a static state. So if you were to interview a 15-year-old young person who had a fight with her parents, who didn't get enough sleep, whose best friend is kind of distancing herself from her, who didn't do as well as possible she wanted to on a school exam, generally feeling a little stressed, a little tired, and a little overwhelmed. It could look on that particular day that this adolescent isn't thriving. But that's what we call a state, meaning that all those things could change in an hour. Sometimes they change really quickly. And then the young person's doing well again. So we want to look not at those states, but as an overall trajectory over time. If I'm working with an 8-year-old who's having trouble managing his emotions, to a certain extent it's developmental. I use the example of going into a grocery store on a Friday night, 6 o'clock, 5-year-old on the floor screaming because she or he can't have a cookie, and a young parent just doing the best to get done the groceries on Friday night. I'm probably not going to give it a second thought, except a lot of empathy for having been there many times myself. It's our hard times on Friday night when everybody's hungry and tired. And a 5-year-old having a meltdown is not that unusual. Because developmentally, the emotional regulation hasn't happened. But if I see the same thing happen with a 17 or 18-year-old, the first thing I'm going to notice is something's not quite right here. And then probably I'm going to assess, is this young person fully developmentally capable? And if so, then I'm going to say something's gone terribly wrong. This young person is not thriving, because we shouldn't see an 18-year-old who falls into a state of absolute meltdown. By 18, they should be able to regulate everything that's going on well enough not to have a meltdown in a grocery store. So that's what we mean by trajectory. At one level, it's going to look like this. At another level, it's going to increase and get better. In each case, the state of it happening, one is developmentally appropriate for a 5-year-old, the other state of having meltdown as an 18-year-old, not so much. Okay, so think about that over time. And then our job is to set that developmental context so that you thrive. Now we have an interesting little line up here at the top. I've got a pointer here, called you see it's youth engagement driving the thriving. And we looked at that as Important because if youth aren't engaged, if we do the best programs we can, we have trained our volunteers, we are ready, we got our activities, youth are going to thrive, and they don't show up, or they come sort of half-hearted, or they're sort of busy with other things, or I don't know, gotta go to my grandmother's funeral, whatever it is, they're just not into what we're doing. We're not going to have much impact on their life. On the other hand, if we can get them deeply engaged, then we're going to have a lot of impact. And again, this is where 4-H can be set itself up very uniquely. Not very many youth-serving organizations have the opportunity to work with young people from the time they're in kindergarten or first grade all the way past high school years in some cases when we look at our collegiate 4-H efforts. We have the opportunity to have kids with us for a long time, and if we can engage them deeply during that time, we're going to have a bigger impact. So we have to think about that this youth engagement moderates the effect of our high-quality program on youth thriving. Now, moderate means it just has an influence. So the more a young person's engaged, the more a young person's going to thrive. The less a young person's engaged, the less we're going to see that thriving happen, regardless of what happens in our programs. So moderate that effect. So when we look at youth engagement, it's easy to say, well, if we have a young person for 10 years in our program, we must be having a bigger effect. But research has shown over and over again that just showing up, even for a long time, really has no correlation to how much a young person benefits from our program. So the equation's a little bit more complex. So we want to look not just at duration, because if we have a young person for 10 years, of course we're going to have it makes sense we're going to have a bigger effect than if we have them for 10 days. That's just logic. But we also have to look at the intensity of a young person's engagement. So are they bleeding green? Are they at everything? When some of the questions that we'll ask is, how important is 4-H to you? Compared to your friends, who are really engaged in 4-H, how engaged in 4-H are you? And they can rate that. So, we're way up there at 10, I'm bleeding green, versus about a 2. Different level of intensity. And then we have to look at the breadth. So some young people will spend their whole 4-H career in just doing their club work. Others will become engaged in other things going on. Maybe they take advantage of county events, of leadership events, of state programs, going to some national events, becoming leaders, teens as teachers, going internationally. You can see that 4-H has a whole breadth of opportunities. So when we look at that duration in the program, that intensity in the program, and the breadth of participation, then we get a better sense of what engagement means. And you probably can think of youth that you've worked with who go like, oh yeah, they really did excel, and I can see how they excelled on all 3 of those dimensions, and why their engagement was so good. So when we go back to this then, oopsie, wrong way, sorry, come back. That's how that effect moderates. You have a great program, great engagement, activities that promote thriving, you're on your way. This is the neat part, because for those of you who are educators, hands-on educators with youth, this is the bulk of your work. And I hope that you see in this echoes of what you're already doing. And that what I hope the 4-H thriving model can do is help you think about the intentionality of places where you can both support your volunteers to do work better, and how you can reframe what you're doing in 4-H already to build thriving. So if we go on then, in the model, we come to developmental outcomes. And these are the outcomes that derive in part from the National 4-H Study of Youth Development, the 5 C's. Anybody familiar with the 5 C's? Okay, a few of you. And then a little bit of massaging that we did based on those. So first of all, academic motivation and success. So we know that doing well in school is important. But for youth to do well in school, they have to feel motivated, and they have to feel, again, a sense of self-efficacy and success. so I can succeed in school. And it's important. It's not just kind of going through the motions because I have to go to high school. How do we set that up? Secondly, thriving youth develop social competence. So from the 5 C's model, competence was kind of a really, really broad competent. You can be competent in athletics, but not so competent socially. Competent academically, but not so competent in athletics. So we really looked at the literature and said, social competence, again, getting back to that sense of emotional intelligence and being able to navigate relationships seemed to rise to the top. So we framed it specifically as social competence. Personal standards. In the 5 C's model, we had a term called character. And so you can think about personal standards on that line of character, but we took it broader and renamed it to get more at kind of the internal moral and ethical responsibility that we see developing in young people. And character became a little, when we did some cognitive interviewing, the teens didn't relate to it. To many teens, the idea of character is like a 4-H connection with others, again, that we live in relationship and we are supported and embedded in them. So the more we're connected, the more successful we're going to be. And then personal responsibility, which when I looked across the 4-H program, and particularly looking at some work around what is it that parents want 4-H kids to get, and then also employers, talk to prospective employers, say, I'll always hire 4-H kids because they're so responsible. So to me, that just seemed like that's really an important outcome that we do in 4-H specifically we need to measure. So those were the outcomes that we looked at in terms of this model. Now, the whole goal here, or the whole model here then says, all right, if we set up developmental contexts, do them really well, we do activities that help you thrive, we have youth who are engaged in our programs, then we should be able to see these outcomes. So when I came on as an evaluation specialist, right away, everyone was just measuring outcomes. Better outcomes, better outcomes. What did you learn? What did you do? How did kids change? And there was nothing given to how did we get to those outcomes. Those are the very early days of evaluation. But our understanding of evaluation, and particularly around youth development, has really changed. And so for us to do 4-H well and to be able to tell our story well, which ultimately is why I started this work, remember, we have to understand what's going on. So we have a little movement afoot now in the field called Youth Development 2.0. And it specifically looks at what's inside the black box. So the black box, imagine here I am. That has a 0.734 with 2 stars after it. Now that beta line just says there is a direct relationship between how good your program is and how much a young person thrives. That's what our research has shown. Specifically, it says if you could increase the quality of your program by 1 point, you will increase youth thriving by 0.73 point. That's how precise we can measure things. And the 2 stars just means this isn't random chance. This is an effect that we can see. That's pretty exciting, because I don't know about you, but if you're going to go to all that effort to do great youth development programming, isn't it cool to know that you're really making a difference? It's scientifically, it's showing. And then you look, the youth thriving, then we go to the gray circle, which is developmental outcomes. And we see another beta line, 1.05, and this one says for every 1 point that you help a youth thrive, you're going to see a 1.05 increase in their developmental outcomes. And then the bottom line that goes at the bottom, between developmental context and developmental outcomes, is the beta line that has an NS after that. And that NS means it's non-significant. What this means is that participating in your program and outcomes, developmental outcomes, are not related. The process goes through youth thriving. So if we don't help you thrive, then we're really not going to have any effect on PYD. You can have all the programs you want, you can measure all the outcomes you want, but without having that mediating, that part that goes in the middle, which is helping you thrive, we're not going to achieve our developmental outcomes. So you can think of that youth thriving, the green circle, as the black box. And that's where we need to put our attention. How do we help you thrive, the youth who are participating in our great program, thrive so that they achieve developmental outcomes? Does that make sense? You think about it as thriving comes in the middle. Thriving is the black box. Thriving is the magic. I had the opportunity at the Greenbrier. Anyone go to West Virginia this year for the con? Wasn't that fun? it was cool. I had the opportunity. I ran into Jennifer Sarangelo, and her CEO of National 4-H Council, and her mother was there with her. And for those of you who know Jennifer, it's quick. She's fast. She's a fundraiser. She's busy. She's got things to do. And she said, "Oh, Mom," she says, "this is Mary Arnold. I really want you to meet her." And her mother says, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I do research to understand how 4-H works. It's magic." It's my elevator speech. That was less than 30 seconds. And she understood it. Because what we're talking about here is understanding how is it that we work our magic. We all know we do. Or we wouldn't be here for 100 years. But now we're beginning to understand how. And the empowering part is that all of you then can begin to think about how you incorporate helping you thrive into the work that you're already doing. So a mediator is something that comes in between, and then we have something called a moderator. Again, a moderator just modifies the effect of something. So when we looked at youth engagement, sure enough, in our model, there was a definite moderation effect. That the teens or the youth who reported being most engaged had the highest thriving scores. And those who were less engaged, less so. So again, how do we keep young people engaged? So your job then becomes, okay, I'm going to set up great developmental contexts. I'm going to focus on activities that help you thrive. And in many, 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 if not most, for all cases, the activities you're already doing are helping you thrive. You might have to, unpack them a little bit, such as talking about emotional regulation before you were in the heat of it. But we're already doing it. And then we have to think about how do we get young people engaged? Through our practices, through what we do, through our accessibility, our opportunities that we have for young people. If we do that well, then those outcomes are going to happen, and then we'll see the long-term outcomes for 4-H, which is academic and vocational success, civic engagement, employability and economic stability, and then happiness and well-being. And if we look at our head, heart, hands, and health, we can see that all along, that's what we've been trying to do by connecting our head with our academic and vocational success, our heart through our contribution to civic engagement, employability and economic stability, our hands, and then happiness and well-being become critically important as well in our long-term outcomes. So that is the 4-H thriving model. And what I'd like to do next is one of two things. First of all, entertain any questions that you have. And then if we have time, I would like to walk you through a couple of sheets that you have at your table as well. So why don't we start with any questions, comments, clarifications that you have. Responses. When they I did this, I was at the Asian 4-H Network conference a few years ago in Taiwan, and the young people were leading it, and they asked for your opinions. I thought that was interesting. Do you have an opinion about this? What are your thoughts? Does it resonate with you? What are you thinking? Okay, I can see where that's going. Let's, what I'd like you to do, on your table there's a copy of the PowerPoint, but there's also 2 sheets. There should be 3 sheets. So there's one on Youth Sparks, there's one on Program Quality Principles, and then there's one on fostering developmental relationships. I would like you at your table to select one of those and talk among yourselves for 5 minutes. And if you want to split into 2 groups at your table, for ease, that's okay too, whatever works. I want you to talk among yourself for 5 minutes. I want you to say, how does this relate to the work that we're currently doing? Where do we see evidence that we're already doing this? And then we'll come back and we'll share a little bit among each other. So our goal again today is to just help you see that you're really already doing this. And so we'll come back with some examples that we can share with everybody. Sound good? Okay, so take 5 minutes and we'll come do that. Definitely hearing some great conversations. So I'm confident that your interest has been sparked in terms of how we apply some of the things that we've already talked about. So I would be interested to invite any of you to just share a little bit about what your group talked about. Which element of the developmental context did you choose? And how did you see echoes of it in the work that you're currently doing? Who'd like to start? And if you'd stand up, that would be great, and also speak loudly so everyone can hear, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you.
We talked about the youth program quality principles because we like the fact that you highlighted opportunity to belong. Because too many kids today don't feel like they belong to anything, including family. They just don't have that sense of belonging at all. And so if you get that sense that you belong to something, that overflows into other things. So therefore it flows into the integration of family and school and community, and maybe they belong to 4-H and they get the confidence and they join something in school, and so that can just build on itself. And we feel like 4-H does a really good job of helping kids to feel like they belong. And we talked about a lot of the other things too, but the fact that what they're doing matters. A lot of kids don't realize that everything they do really does matter. And so just even telling them, great job, or keep up the good work, or let's try this and see what else we can do to make it better. I think those are important things. And we talked about a lot of other things too.
Yeah, you bring up a super important point, and that need for belonging is universal and very base in us. And if we can't find a place to belong in a positive way, we will find it in ways that are not so positive. So if you think about gangs, one of the biggest draws about gangs is a sense of belonging. I have a place where I belong. And again, you think about radicalization, some of the radicalization of young people that's happening. Again and again, the stories of it provides a place for identity and belonging. Who am I? And I belong. So I may take an identity that's less than savory, and I will belong to a less than savory group. And by less than savory, I mean not benefiting society as a whole. So young people have to belong. We all have to belong. And when we open our hearts and minds and doors and programs to young people, no matter where they are, who they are, we're taking the biggest, hugest first step in youth development that we can take. And that's why when we talk about the essential elements, belonging, 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 belonging. So good. That's great. Thanks. Okay, who else?
We actually talked about the same one, and almost had a couple of different things that we talked about. And one of those was supportive relationships. And we like the fact that you have, younger members and older members, and they're supporting, those older members get the opportunity to be a part of that support network. And that's one of our favorite parts about 4-H. And then we also talked about opportunity for skill building, and we think that's just, through projects, just leads to that automatically. And then we go to things like fair or club day where we can exhibit some of those things that we've been working on.
And so you actually touched on a really important point too, that when we talk about developmental relationships, I presented it as between an adult and a youth, but actually youth and youth-to-youth developmental relationships. Our friend Rachel, when she got back from camp, she applied to, there was like a contest through Samsung and National 4-H Council for this camp funding, and you could win a whole bunch of Samsung technology. And but they had to go back from their camp program and teach in an elementary school or have some program at home where they're kind of blossoming as a little teacher. And she wasn't sure she could do it. And her friend said, yes, you can, and you have to, and I will help you. And she got her all set up so she could go into elementary schools and teach about ocean health and 4-H. And indeed, she ended up winning the national award. And when she went to accept the national award, her friend was right with her. And she said, my friend is largely responsible for me having done this, because without her support and encouragement and confidence that you have to do this, I'm not sure I would have. That's a developmental relationship. That's empowering. And so it is between youth. And the other thing that we know from research, that youth leading and youth teaching is an essential part of youth development, and they love to do it if they're scaffolded well into it. And little kids love learning from teens. They just really relate. They're their heroes, their mentors, their friends. And so great things that we have going. Again, already the things we do and do well. Okay, who else would like to share?
We talked about fostering developmental relationships, and one of the things that I shared was last year I hosted a project day to help foster those relationships. We always get the complaint that from a leader standpoint that the kids don't show up for project meetings, so why should we have them? And we have folks who are driving 30 minutes or more to attend. And so they want to make it worth their while. So we did a project day that was 3 hours long, and we had 4 sessions of 45 minutes. Each of the county or club leaders could sign up for a session. And so a kid could come and get 4 project meetings in the afternoon. But what it did was it really helped facilitate some of those relationships, because the kids see those leaders at the county fair, but they may not have any other interactions with them. And we used it as a growing day, because the leaders were super excited. They had kids that were there at their project meetings. There were lots of conversations happening from parents while they're standing back at the meetings. And we had kids who were super excited because they got to learn more about their projects. Ultimately, those relationships that were strengthened by one day or one afternoon to serve a purpose. So,
yeah, that's really great. And that really touches on something I talked about in terms of youth engagement. The kids aren't showing up, then you might have to change how you're doing it. And you did it in a way that helped them get excited, become more engaged, the leaders and volunteers becoming more integrated in that way as well. So we're increasingly going to have to think about our access and the way we do our programming. Because there's nothing worse than planning everything and nobody comes. People say, I am going to come, but then you know how teenagers are, right? They're so busy. So how do we set a stage where they can be engaged, fully engaged, get some synergy going, and begin to build on that? So good for you. There's a great engagement strategy for you. Just, you need to write that up. Maybe you could write it for my blog. I'd love to have it. Okay, I'm not kidding, by the way. I really want my blog to be like, practitioners, I want everybody to participate, because this isn't just academic and heady, that's for the website. This is for fun. Okay, so who else would like to share? One more good example at least.
If you want lunch, that one.
Oh yeah, okay, this is just threw down the gauntlet. Okay. Yeah?
Well, I guess we kind of started talking about the fostering development of relationships. Talk about, how best we can relate this and keep implementing this with volunteers, seeing as they're the ones that are seeing the kids at the project meetings a lot more and club meetings once a month. So see it from our side also, like how can this apply to a volunteer, to someone who is not their full-time job, but it's something where we can make it convenient for them, easy to learn, and small steps to start applying it at the club meetings with whether it's adult helpers or the club leaders themselves.
Yep. So thank you for that. That's a really great segue into how I wanted to wrap it up. And that is, up until this point, I largely have been doing this work myself, my colleague Ryan Gagnon, who's a senior analyst on the project. But I'm so excited because one of the things that has happened with the 4-H Thriving model is it has organically taken off. And by that I mean it's come from a groundswell of interest as I've gone around and talked to people that have said, ooh, I want to learn more, I want to be able to do this. And quickly to the point where it overran my capacity to kind of develop all these materials. So in working with the National 4-H program leaders, they encouraged me to get an officially chartered working group under the Program Leaders Working Group Charter. And so I did that last summer. And so we have a working group, a task force called Advancing the 4-H Thriving Model. And there's 3 subgroups in that task force who are getting underway as we speak. The first task force, co-led by Anissa and some other colleagues, is going to focus on professional development for educators and volunteers to determine and develop exactly the thing you're talking about, because we know you're not going to sit down with volunteers for 2 hours and talk about this and have any impact. We need things where we can build capacity, build volunteer skill, build staff skill in small but effective bites and ways of teaching. So that group is really going to look at how we do that. Very exciting part of this is that through funding that I've received, we're going to be able to partner with Search Institute, who is going to help us identify and develop some of those training materials. A lot of the 4-H Thriving model is based on their research, and so they are eager to be our partner and kind of share that part, which is really exciting. The 4-H is going to align with Search Institute. I think we're going to be ahead there. The second group is going to look at further research on the model. So what we have established so far on the model that I showed you with the statistical numbers on it is what we call a main effect. That this works on kind of your kind of middle of the road 4-H club member doing kind of middle of the road 4-H things. But we don't know how it works on youth and urban after school settings. We don't know how it works on a wide variety of ethnic and racial backgrounds of young people. We don't know how it works in camp settings. We don't know there's a lot of the different things we don't know yet. And so we're at the point in the testing of the model where we have to ask the next question is, does it work for whom and under what conditions? So we may find as we look a little further that, oh, you know what? If you're working in an after-school setting, then this may have to be tweaked. This part of the model may have to be a little bit different, how we think about it. If you're working in urban areas with under-resourced communities, then we might have to look at it this way. And we don't know what this and that are at this point, but it's important that we begin to refine the model and have more and more confidence about it. So that work is getting underway. It's going to be super important to do. And then the third group is going to look at organizational alignment across the whole 4-H system. So if you think about how big and unwieldy our system is. I mean, at one level, it's wonderful because we're in virtually every county across the country. Isn't that cool? But that's a lot of people working in state universities, working under program leaders. The program leaders are working together as a group. And then we have National 4-H Council, and then we're going to have NIFA resurrected, hopefully, or National 4-H. We have NAE 4-HA, soon to be NAE 4-HA YDP. Is that how it's going to be? We have ECOP 4-H. We have all sorts of stakeholders in determining what we do. So, and then on top of that, we have the 5 C's, and we have the essential elements, and some do character counts, and I mean, we're just kind of all over the board in our description of youth development. So it seemed to me that a really important part of what we do is to bring all that together in alignment. So we have a common message, a common way of speaking about 4-H, again, to strengthen our presence and our ability to say, we are 4-H, and here's the magic that we work. I can tell you how we do our magic. So that group's going to look at that organizational alignment and what we need to do there. And then quickly, 2 other points that I think are really important to make. I know yesterday that your keynote speaker talked about ACEs. So the emerging understanding of adverse childhood experiences is a bit, and trauma in particular, is a big part of the world we're working in today. That understanding is part of a larger movement called the Sciences of Learning and Development, SOLD, S-O-L-D, that is taking, really grabbing hold in terms of youth development research and practice across the United States. So it's not just ACEs, but also individualized learning, how we're more effective at teaching, all these sciences that are sort of coming together. We're going to see that incorporated more and more into the 4-H thriving model. Exactly how that works, remains to be seen, but you can expect that what you heard about yesterday will fully become part of how we're talking about youth thriving as well. So they're not 2 separate things entirely, and we'll align them even more going forward. And then the final thing I want to say, because I think this is really, really important, is our commitment to equity among all youth, opportunities for all youth in 4-H across the United States. One of the things that we're always in danger of is if we look at something like the 4-H thriving model and we don't look at what it means in terms of setting that in terms of equity, social justice, cultural backgrounds, cultural responsiveness, and how we put that into different settings. And I really believe strongly in that work. Nia Fields, some of you might know Nia she's the program leader in Maryland now, but she's just done some amazing work on equity issues, engaging youth in 4-H. So we'll see a lot of the equity lens, she calls it the equity lens on the 4-H thriving model, also coming forward. So those 2 things are important out there and will become integrated as we go forward. All right, it's 1 minute to noon, and Anissa warned me that I was keeping you from your lunch, and that may not be in my best interest. But I want to leave you with a poem today. This is from Mary Oliver, who left us this year. But it's a poem that I read frequently between watching the video of National 4-H Congress Code of Conduct. But if I also need to think about why is it that I do the work that I do, I think about this poem. I think about the beauty of the Skagit Valley and the mountains where I grew up. Teach the children. We don't matter so much, but the children do. Show them daisies and the pale hypatia. Teach them the taste of sassafras and wintergreen. The the lives of blue sailors, mallow, sunbursts, the moccasin flowers. And the frisky ones, inkberry, lamb's quarters, blueberries. And the aromatic ones, rosemary, oregano. Give them peppermint to put in their pockets as they go to school. Give them the fields and the woods and the possibility of the world salvaged from the lords of profit. Stand them in the stream, head them upstream. Rejoice as they learn to love this green space they live in, its sticks and leaves, and then the silent, beautiful blossoms. Attention is the beginning of devotion. Mary Oliver. So thank you so much for your time this morning, and I'll turn it over to Edith.
I talked about how you can set up your programs, get kids engaged, and focus on developing relationships, promote quality. But I just kind of breezed over, you should do activities to promote thriving. So what I hope we can do in this session is to look at the thriving indicators more carefully, and I do a little jigsaw. You know what the jigsaw teaching technique is? This is good for you educators. So if I were to just spend the next hour talking about each of the 6 indicators and what you can do to promote them. By the second one, you'd be going, and I would lose you probably close to the middle part of the second one. But if you do a jigsaw technique, you get different groups to learn part of it, and then they teach the rest of us about it, and then together we put the whole puzzle together and kind of share that teaching opportunity. So what I'm hoping we can do, can we count the amount of people we have? Sure. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Okay, so I think we have 3 or 4 people in a group. And what I'd like you, I'll give each one of you a packet of the thriving, these are called thriving tip sheets. And these are really useful. You'll get these, but they're also on my website. You can download them. But they're written towards educators and volunteers. So, for example, how can you promote translation awareness? So then there's a list of tips that you can use. So what I'd like to do is let's count, kind of to maybe we can go 4 there, and would you mind turning around and joining this group? Would that be okay? And then we'll go these 4 in one group, and these 3 in a group. Okay, so that's 3 groups, and then 4 and 3. So that's 4, 5, and then this will be 1 group. But that's not okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is hand out these and assign you a thriving indicator, and your group can take the top one. And your group, can do hopeful purposes on the second page. And your group can do the third page, which is hopefully we can say it. Challenging discovery. Pro-social orientation. Okay.
is that what the indicator is, decide how you're going to teach it to the rest of the group. And you can teach it to the rest of the group in very creative ways. There's no rules. So you don't have to lecture. So you're going to learn the indicator, plan as a group how you're going to teach the rest of us what that indicator is, and then come up with 2 or 3 examples of where you see it already in 4-H or how you might enhance an activity that you already do to promote this thriving movement. Does that make sense? So 3 parts: discuss and learn, decide how you're going to teach the rest, and then come up with a couple examples of how this is already being done or how you can see tweaking an activity you already do to teach the thriving movement. Sound good? Okay, so we'll take about 15 minutes to 20 minutes to do this, and then we'll come back and share. And I should say that the first page is the primary page, the second page is just the model and other details. You can glance at the bulk of the information. Is just the first page.
So, I would like to ask for a brave volunteer group, and I'm going to have you come up here and use the microphone just so everybody can hear. Come and teach us about your indicator. First of all, tell us what your indicator is, and then teach us about it. And then you're going to give us some examples of activities that you already do that could be tweaked, or new activities that maybe you came up with that you could use to promote this thriving indicator with youth. Okay, so who'd like to go first? Be brave. All right, great.
Okay, our indicator is challenge and discovery. And how we thought we could teach it was just using 4-H club days as an example. Okay, sorry. We didn't practice. So the challenge and discovery is about supportive and helpful ways that teaches them to learn and grow. So like she was talking about earlier, instead of discouraging someone from doing something, you're being supportive and encouraging them to keep trying. So when we do 4-H club days, one of the things is identify ways to challenge learning and growth in small but steady steps. So one thing they could do is watch the older kids do their demonstrations and learn that at one point you can be doing as well as they can. You just have to keep practicing. And that's part of using the phrase not yet as well. So maybe you're not there yet, but you can get there one day. Club Days also has a bunch of different things that you can do, so you're encouraging them to try new things. And then you're also using the support of others. So a lot of kids are in band together, so they can practice those things together. They can practice their demonstrations in front of each other and critique each other and what they notice. And And 3 things that we already see this done is 4-H days, of course. The fair, you have your judges who are going to give you constructive criticism, so you can come back each year and improve. I just noticed it this year at our rabbit show. One of our girls shows her cat every year. Last year was her first year. And she came back, and before she was even doing her project to the judge, she went up to the judge and was like, I worked on this, I worked on this, and I worked on this, all because you told me that last year. So she was using this to help her. And then we just wrote down project meetings are really anywhere that you're going to get judged. So.
Okay, so just a couple things behind this idea of growth or openness to challenge and discovery that I'd like you to just take with you. So kind of key things. One, this idea of not yet. I am blank, not yet. And if that's a language that we can start to use, so we're really intentional about encouraging growth and encouraging that growth mindset is really important. The second part, I'd like to just talk a little bit about where this idea of growth comes from, developmental psychology-wise. The Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky recognized that when we do more than we're capable of, and it's way beyond our ability, we'll actually crash and burn. So I'm a horseback rider. Let's just say you have a young child or young 4-H'er who's afraid. And you just say, it's okay, get on this horse. Slap the horse on the bottom and horse gallops off. That child's going to be terrified. I'm probably never going to get on a horse again. But if we were to do something where I said, well, it's all right to be afraid, but why don't we come up and we'll learn how to pet the horse, we'll learn how to lead the horse, and then maybe we'll get on the horse and I'll lead you around, or however it is. That's called scaffolding behavior, scaffolding support. And we want to operate, as we're helping young people grow and develop, in what's called the zone of proximal development. Those are Vygotsky's words. But basically, imagine you are here, and there's a zone just beyond where you are. That's a little challenging, but not overwhelming. And then there's the zone that's too far. So I'm here afraid. This is uncomfortable, but I'm not terrified, and now maybe I'll take another step, which is very different than how I learned to swim, which was when my cousin threw me in Coeur d'Alene, and I didn't know how. Thank goodness my aunt was right there to save me. I didn't want to get in the water for a while. That was a pretty frightening experience. So I always think about that gradual scaffolding of learning. I love the example of modeling, both the older teens and us as educators and volunteers, that we model. And we learn from each other. So let's watch these presentations being given, and then you can see how it's done and how you might do it. One little interesting tidbit here, and this has to do with girls. Girls in adolescent settings where they're being challenged and they're not sure they can do it, can have a negative effect. So girls are less likely to take those positive risks of learning, where boys are not quite so much, so they don't really care so much. But girls are very sensitive to looking like they look, what they think they look like, but not competent in some way. So as you're setting up these activities, particularly when it involves that, you just think about girls, maybe they need to have a little bit more social support and encouragement that it's okay if you don't know how to do this. That's why we're here learning. It's just kind of a gender difference that pops up pretty frequently. So something going on there in the lives of adolescent girls, in the sense that they're on the stage all the time. Everyone's judging them. Okay, so good job. All right, so who would like to go next? Okay, great. Our group that ended up large.
So we had through transcendent awareness, and I go back to essential elements when I read this, and this is the belonging. This is, we want youth to know that they are a part of something bigger than themselves, and that they can have a bigger impact than just the individual. And so how do we instill that service-loving, community-aware, all those skills in our youth?
I think I made the comment, we drew the easy one, because as we look through the bullet points here, take time to see that youth see the world around them, that they feel connected to the outdoors. We do that through our camping programs. Encourage opportunities to volunteer and serve others. We do that through leadership roles and through community service activities. Generosity among youth, again, the same way to make ethical decisions and how what a decision they make, how that affects others. The example we just talked about was YQCA, and that those choices have effects on the food system and those sort of things. So I really think that there are many, many examples of how we're doing this, but we all agree that probably to take it to the next level, we need to be more purposeful, particularly as we work with volunteers, and this is what we're doing. Think about this, encourage this, support this, and help, don't take it for granted that just because they're in 4-H, they get it. So.
Yeah, when you think about something like quality assurance, what we're teaching, content or skill-wise or concept-wise, is you're contributing to the food system, and therefore we want to be careful about what you put into the food system and how you raise your animals. It really matters. But are we taking it the next step to say, and the reason we care is because we care about each other, and if we have a polluted food system or a food system that's damaging people, then that's not a very ethical way in the world. I don't know that we take it that next step, as you say, often to think about, well, why does it matter that we're careful about our food system? So sometimes it's that deeper questioning, but at any time that you can get a young person to see that they're not the center of the universe, and that I love how you said collectively we can have a bigger impact. We work together. And so we think about 4-H from the very time they're little. We're doing service projects, we're teaching about generosity, we're, I remember going to the many nursing homes with cupcakes on Valentine's Day. But what difference did that really make in the moment? Well, over time it begins to tell you that it's not about you, that it's about us being in community with other people and making choices accordingly. So I love that one. And I have to say, I'm giving you guys a little start because you are the first group with that particular indicator that said we got the easy one, because usually that one's a little bit more harder to grasp. So well done that way. Kansas is going to shine now. All right, who would like to go next?
So the one that we have is having a hopeful purpose, and that's your spark. That's what gives the kids a spark to join 4-H, to reach out to do something. I use the example of, I had two daughters that both went to KYLF. When they left, they were both interested in being on the state council, but the younger one said, that's what I want to do, and she reached out and she did it. She was on state council, she did an exchange student, she went to Ohio Buckeye experience, but she found her spark when she did it. She loved what she did, and it was because of a 4-H experience that gave it to her. Both girls went, but only one of them actually reached out to do what they wanted. And when the younger one went to Finland as an exchange student, the older one said, well, Mom, I never got to do that. I said, you never asked to do that either. And they said, you could, and you still can if you want to, but it wasn't her spark to do that. So I think 4-H provides those opportunities, and KYLF was just one of them.
Yeah, so we talk about how KYLF exposes you to a lot of leadership opportunities to find that spark, and her daughter found that particular spark. And then we talked about how camp provides opportunity for youth to explore different project areas. And so you often hear your younger 4-Hers leaving 4-H camp with a sparked interest in a project area that maybe they hadn't been exposed to. So that's kind of a unique experience with that.
Just to follow up on that, I guess is kind of the pathways. It was that spark I had at 4-H camp and being a camp counselor that have led me to where I am today. I wouldn't be an extension agent if it wouldn't be for that. So it's those things through 4-H. I really say that and say that 4-H is responsible for where I am today. And then another spark would be citizenship and going to CIA. People might be excited about, getting in the political system or learning more about how our political system. It's just finding that spark through 4-H, and we just don't know what kid's going to have what spark.
Then our final example kind of seems like a long shot, but it's record books. You don't think that those are normally something that's going to spark someone. But as we read through these bullet points, two of them were encourage youth to set meaningful goals and develop plans for achieving them, and then show youth the pathway into the future, which I think is exactly what record books do.
So a couple of comments on this one, on hopeful purpose. Briefly, just the connection of purpose and hope with our adolescent mental health. That's a huge one. When we have adolescent mental health problems, a lot of times we see related no sense of purpose, no sense of hope. So this is, wow, one of the most important areas that we're working in, I think, in this particular moment in time. There is quite a bit of emerging research that says our purpose and what our goals are in terms of our sense of purpose and goals for ourselves in life, the more that those are not about me, like for example, I want to become a doctor because I'll make a lot of money and I can drive a fancy car, versus I want to be a doctor because I want to help people and I want to go wherever I'm going to do this rural part of my state and become a doctor because we don't have good doctors in my community. The relationship of those goals, same goal, we're going to be a doctor, to life satisfaction is really overwhelmingly showing that those who just do it for the money are not the happiest campers in the world. So when we think about this, we have to think about that end outcome that we have of life happiness and well-being. And this is where I worry a little tiny bit, kind of more than a little tiny bit, about the push to excel. We saw this in Dr. Lerner's National 4-H study of youth development, that the girls who were the highest achievers also struggled with depression and anxiety. And I can tell you, I know in many cases, more than I would like to, of girls that kind of went blindly, and it seems to be girls, there seems to be pressure, there's a little bit of gender difference there, blindly through their high school, their college, or wherever they're going to go, and reached where they thought they were at a goal and found themselves deeply unhappy and having to change course. So there's two parts to developing a hopeful sense of purpose, and they're both related to identity development. One is the opportunity to explore. What are some potential things I might want to do for my future purpose or emerging purpose? And you talked about that in the activities. Like we can go here and you might learn that. It might be your spark, it might not. So that exploration becomes really important. The other one is called commitment. So that dimension says at some point you have to commit to something. We know a lot of young adults who are kind of just not really sure what's going on. But we put those two things together, of exploration on one and then commitment on the other. We can look at some quadrants. One of the most dangerous ones in terms of lifelong health and well-being is where commitment is high and exploration is low. So I'm 17 years old. I don't have to explore. I know exactly what I'm going to do, and I'm so committed to this. And I'm putting the blinders on, and I'm going for this. That, we call that identity foreclosure, meaning maybe too soon. Now, that's not the case in all cases, because, for example, let's just say you are a prodigy violinist, and you become a violinist, that's all you're ever going to do, that was your spark, and you knew it from the time you were 5 years old. You foreclosed on it that young. It happens. But in general, what we want to think about is keeping that exploration open while an encouragement to commit becomes stronger. Does that make sense? So I'm working with a young person, and they are interested in this, they see this as their purpose, what they're hopeful for. We begin the commitment process by saying, how are we going to get there? You talked over here about all the number of youth in your community who want to be professional athletes. So that is kind of a commitment to that, but not really exploring all the options and possibilities. How many people really become professional athletes? What happens if you get injured or something doesn't work? So I want to think about that, helping young people explore and then also helping them commit. So they arrive at the end of our time with us with a good sense of what comes next. I'm committed to school. I'm committed to a transition to work or whatever it is that a young person is going to do. Those are just some of the theoretical things behind purpose and commitment, because I know that you're don't have enough in your brains already today. Okay, who's our next group?
So we had through positive emotionality, which is basically just
learning to manage your emotions effectively and managing the negative emotions and redirecting them into a positive. So 2 times where emotions are high are camp and fair. So we chose camp, for example. Open door policy and just validating feelings, homesickness mostly, that they're okay, they're not the only one feeling that, and how to redirect that into a positive light. And also part of our job is to train the volunteers that we work with to recognize these symptoms or emotions or reactions from the child that we're working with, and how to redirect them or encourage them to change and redirect.
So just that take-home message of this idea of all feelings are mentionable, therefore all feelings are manageable. If you're homesick, you're homesick. And how do we then begin in the middle of the night, especially 100 miles from home, help that young person get through the night by normalizing the situation. You're okay. You're not the only one. I know this is awful, but you're all right. So supporting a young child in the feeling of their emotion, directing to something positive, such as what a great place camp is. How much fun did you have today? Tomorrow we're going to do that. So we're kind of reframing that negative into positive. And then the second part, again, just being really alert, especially in adolescence, towards the suppression of emotion and rather than appropriate expression. And then the other part that we didn't really talk about too much is emotional regulation, which is appropriate response to an emotion, especially a strong emotion. So if I am frustrated and angry and I turn around and I take it out on my steer, is that going to be okay? No, that's not appropriate. There's a lot of problems going on there. So we have to work on that. We teach that appropriate expression. The feeling itself is valid. It's how you're feeling, but how we express it has to be managed in a way that's healthy and safe for everybody. Okay, I think we have 2 groups left. I'm glancing over here. It feels like it's this way.
So ours was the goal setting, and so that one I think is pretty self-explanatory for the most part, but we talked about just going through, and oftentimes one of the biggest things that our group came up with was in goal setting. One of the things that we kept going back to is KAPs and record books, and how we get those in our office and read through them, and the goals are something more to the effect of, well, I want to get a purple ribbon, or I want to win showmanship, and they're very vague goals that are maybe not always the most attainable in regards to if they're very subject to outside opinions, like maybe a judge's opinion that's not always going to be the same from case to case or day to day. So really focusing on when we're setting those goals, how we're going to get those goals to their end point. And so with that, we decided one of the best ways we came up to use that was using the hope map from yesterday, and being able to figure out what the spark or that endpoint goal, kind of the passions that those youth had to get to that point was, and then starting out and identifying some barriers or obstacles that could even get in the way for those young people of getting to their goals. And then along the way, in that pathway, not only just coming up with some plans to get there, but making sure that our goals that we're setting are good goals, and making sure, kind of going back to that SMART goals that everyone's heard of, making sure that we have all of those parts and aspects to those goals set, that they're specific, timely, measurable, attainable, realistic, and making sure that we can get to those goals. And then when we do identify those barriers, thinking of different ways that we can, if there is a barrier that prevents us from getting to that end point of our goal, what are some ways that we can maybe redirect those goals to still end up at that same spark or end point of our goal that we're going to be getting to.
So they identified an important part that I didn't highlight earlier, and that is the importance of being able to help youth reorient when goals aren't achieved. So, or goals aren't achieved, we can talk about that in terms of grit, keep going. But what about if the goal is no longer possible? So let's say my goal was to win champion at the fair this year, and I broke my leg 2 weeks before fair. So it's just not possible for me to even try to reach this goal. How do we then help a young person reorient themselves and fix on a new goal, a possible goal, and keep on going so that things don't become the end of the world if we don't achieve something that we set out to achieve. We can be disappointed, we can be sad, we can be all those things, and yet at the same time we have to say, all right, because this is life. It doesn't always work out the way we want. So set those goals, but then how do we build those skills for reorientation and recommitment instead of devastation and giving up? Okay, I think we have one last group. Is our pro-social group gone? Are you? Yeah? Are you the pro-social group? Okay.
So we had pro-social orientation, so the orange page there, and we kind of just talked that really deals with your relationships with others, your relationships with the volunteers that work in your organization, the kid-to-kid relationship between the olders being the mentors to the youngers, how do those individuals model good behavior and expectations. But then we also kind of hit on that self-regulation piece as well, as I am learning how to be a social person. They have one persona on Facebook or whatever it is, their Snapchats, but how do I interact face-to-face with other individuals and deal with their perspectives on the world, and how do we have those conversations that might be kind of challenging without being rude, I guess would be the best way. And something that came up that we talked about was Jordan had a great thought on setting norms with the kids in like 4-H council meetings was something we talked about, that not every group is going to come to the table with the same group norms of how life should go. And so working individually with that group of 15, 20, 30 kids and setting those norms and letting them have that voice is going to be critical to the success that you see with that group. Because what might be okay, you gave the example of the kid that comes from the rough home life, and they're in that moment versus the kid that's over here. Their social norms are going to be totally different from place to place. So those were our takeaways. We talked about day camp being someplace that the older kids can model for the youngers. And then 48 hours of 4-H, how do I have a role in this social setting? Jordan was my buddy.
How is moral support?
So two really important points that you made. One, I talked about that the underlying theory developmentally behind this is social learning theory. And when social learning theory was first, developed, we learned face-to-face. We didn't learn via social media. And when we're face-to-face, as you know, we have a lot more clues about the interaction than we do when we just read a text. I have many people in my life, I'll get a text, and if I didn't know them, I would think, whoa, that's a zinger. But I actually know who the person is, and I know it's not at all. It's not that person's intention, it just comes across email that way. So when we're helping adolescents learn how to behave socially, we've got some big, unusual, and new challenges right now in terms of their interaction and their face-to-face understanding. Yet again, it's one of the most critical things we can do, is be able to work together. Super, super important. So, okay, you guys did great. We did all 6, am I right? It felt like we did. Okay, good. So we have just a few minutes left. That was kind of a whirlwind dive into promoting the thriving indicators. These tip sheets are available on our website, and you can, I think the website's on them. As the Program Leaders Working Group Task Force gets going, I know these will be updated, so keep coming back as you need materials. But I hope that they might be useful, as we talked about earlier, just to introduce a concept to your volunteers in a quick 10-minute interaction using a tip sheet like that. That was the purpose of this. So you're not sitting down giving them a lecture on social learning theory, but you're talking about, we're working with young people. PYD is an important part of what we do in 4-H. Social learning is challenging right now for young people because it's hard to learn when we're not face-to-face. We learn from each other's cues. How can we do this in 4-H? Here's some ideas. And sometimes it's just a matter of putting that consciousness into someone's intentionality about what they're doing, helping them connect the dots as well. So I hope that was useful. Before we finish, are there any questions, comments that we should ahas share with each other?
Sometimes the struggle isn't always about the youth, it's about the parents that
Yeah. Yeah. Children or youth grow up in all sorts of contexts, the family being the big one. And so those can be big hills to climb sometimes. And we can only chip away at what we can chip away. But I think the more cognizant we are of exactly what we're trying to do, and then how, for example, you have a young person who has been raised in a situation where not being polite or not being socially effective is rewarded. How do we deal with that? How do we begin to work with that young person where they are? Our keynote speaker at NAE4HA this year, I really enjoyed him. And he said, he was talking about ACEs and childhood trauma in particular, but he said, too many people ask, what's wrong with this child? Rather than what does this child need from me to succeed? And I think just reframing that question, because I hear that a lot in my world. People are really quick to judge kids these days. Teens, put them down. What's wrong with them? And I try and always turn that around and say, what do they need from us? Let's focus on that. And then let's be the people who can help give them what they need. We can't solve every problem, but we can definitely contribute, even against sometimes some dire-looking odds. Okay. Well, I think we're right on time. So thank you so much for coming for this little extra session, and take your sheets with you. They're yours to have, and enjoy the rest of your day.